Good day. That we are past the most dangerous point in the Ukraine crisis, or at least the crisis on Ukraine's eastern border, is becoming increasingly clear as the hours and the days pass by. I say that because there's been a number of interesting moves and signals from the various parties which all combine to suggest that they no longer see this crisis as one which is going to flare imminently in outright fighting. Of course, the possibility of war cannot be completely discounted, but as I have argued from the outset, that is unlikely. That has always been unlikely, and now it is highly improbable, to say the least. This is despite flesh-creeping talk from the Ukrainian side that the Russians might be minded to deploy nuclear weapons to Crimea. For all I know, they already have, and maybe those nuclear weapons have been there for some time now. Who's to say? But regardless of that, the option of retaking Crimea from Russia militarily simply does not exist. So what has the news been? Firstly, we're getting all sorts of strange stories about the movements of the two US warships, the two Arleigh destroyers, which were supposed to be heading to the Black Sea and which made some waves a few days ago. The Russian Deputy Foreign Minister, Sergei Ryabkov, said that for their own health, they should remain far away from the Crimea and Russia's Black Sea coast. And there have been reports in the Russian and Turkish media that the ships have actually turned round and have stopped around Crete, and that they're not going to go into the Black Sea after all. There is even a report which says that the Pentagon has actually confirmed that they're not going to go to the Black Sea, and that the story that they were heading to the Black Sea was entirely Russian disinformation. That, by the way, is certainly not the case. Just a few weeks ago, about a week ago, I can clearly remember reading in the US media stories, I think they were on CNN, that the US was intending to send warships into the Black Sea in order to make a show of force in support of Ukraine in its current standoff with Russia. That was a report, as I reiterate, that appeared in the US media, possibly CNN, possibly somewhere else. And sure enough, a couple of days later, the Turks were apparently confirming to the Russians and to the other Black Sea powers that the US had indeed requested permission to send its warships through the Black Sea, through the Bosphorus, though in fact that request had been made rather earlier than the story in the US media suggested. The decision to deploy the warships to the Black Sea had been taken and had been asked, and permission had been asked of the Turks about 2 weeks before the Russian deployments began. Having said that, it now seems most likely, I say most likely because, as I said, I haven't been able to confirm these reports, that these warships are not going to go to the Black Sea after all. Daily Sabah, which is a Turkish newspaper close to the Erdogan government and very well informed about these matters, say that they have been told by the US Embassy that there is no intention to actually deploy these warships to the Black Sea, and that idea has been called off. So a decision has clearly been made that it's perhaps better, given the threats the Russians are making, to keep the ships away from the Black Sea. And besides, as several military commentators have pointed out, including Andrei Martyanov, who is a Russian military commentator who I believe is based in the United States, those warships would anyway not have very much to do in the event of any actual fighting, since they lack the means to intervene directly in any conflict that was taking place in eastern Ukraine. So it possibly, most likely, no US warships in the Black Sea. But there's been a lot of other developments also. Firstly, the Russian central bank has now said that he doesn't think that there is any possibility whatsoever that Russia will indeed be disconnected from Western payment systems. In other words, Russians will be able to continue to use Visa and MasterCard, and Russian banks will continue to be able to use SWIFT. Now, for the Russian central bank to say that with such confidence, it suggests that they believe that there is not going to be a war in eastern Ukraine, and that the crisis is indeed abating there. But perhaps, for me, the most interesting indicator of all of this was a truly bizarre press conference which General Lloyd Austin, the US Defense Secretary, gave on a trip to Germany with the German Defense Minister Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer. Now, this was a visit by Lloyd Austin, which many people had linked to the events in Ukraine. And in fact, there was expected to be all sorts of resounding comments and discussions about Ukraine over the course of this press conference. One might have expected so. After all, there's been that statement from the G7 foreign ministers that I discussed a short while ago. There's been all sorts of statements by other foreign leaders, and NATO and the G7 have all said that they're worried and concerned by the scale of the Russian buildup. Well, astonishingly, absolutely nothing or hardly anything was said about Ukraine over the course of this press conference at all. The only thing that was said in the opening statements by the two defense ministers was said not by General Austin, but by an Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer. And here it is what she said. Along with all kinds of other things, North Korea, the South China Sea, NATO, every aspect of the Germany's and the US's relations, she said the following. Of course, we also discussed Eastern Ukraine today. We agreed, and you have already heard that after the G7 meeting yesterday, we agreed that we are concerned about Russian troop movements, and we are monitoring and looking at them closely. That was all. And then there were questions, and predictably, a German journalist asked the very first question, which was about Ukraine. And this is the question. I'm reading the question itself now. Secretary Austin, welcome to Germany. My first question goes to you. Secretary Austin, you just announced the deployment of additional troops to Germany, which is a surprise. I would like to know, does this have to do anything with the current situation in eastern Ukraine? Can we read this additional deployment as a sign to Russia? And in connection to that, the US position on Nord Stream 2 has been to end. Nord Stream 2 has been very tough in recent years, and it hasn't changed under the new administration. I would like to know if you'll even strengthen in this demand to end Nord Stream 2 by the situation in eastern Ukraine. That was the question. And then the answer, well, first of all, an intervention from the official translator. Unfortunately, the interpreters cannot hear the question. The microphone does not seem to be working. And then Austin went on to discuss various parts of the question, including, by the way, Nord Stream 2. And in fact, he said nothing about Ukraine at all. He entirely avoided the question. Well, you can believe, if you wish, that there were problems with the microphone, or perhaps, and I know this sort of thing does happen in press conferences, a decision was made to quieten the microphone and to make the question inaudible so as to avoid General Austin being put in a position where he had to answer it. And in fact, Austen did say one quite interesting thing, but it was not about Ukraine. It was about the support of the United States for NATO. Camp Kallenbauer, by the way, had this to say about Nord Stream 2. Your question about Nord Stream 2, does it make sense if you ask to have a moratorium just before the completion of the project? Well, of course, this is a question that one may pose, but I'm absolutely convinced that even if we complete Nord Stream 2, then we will have to still, and then there was nothing, and then Austen went on to say that, in fact, Nord Stream 2 would not be a problem between Germany and the United States. So there we are. Nothing essentially of substance about Ukraine at all, out of a telephone, out of a press conference held by arguably held by the defense ministers of the two most powerful NATO states. Well, so there we are. I mean, silence, equivocation, apparently of withdrawal from US forces. And of course, all this following up from that telephone call by Biden to President Putin, in which, as I discussed yesterday, he asked Putin for help to de-escalate the situation. Biden asked Putin for help to de-escalate the situation in eastern Ukraine. And why are we in this situation? What is the position? Now, I have said, and I've discussed in my previous videos, that this is because the Western powers grossly underestimated the scale of the Russian reaction to the original Ukrainian movement of troops to the contact line with eastern Ukraine, with the two breakaway republics in the Donbass in eastern Ukraine, and that they're now alarmed, and that they're doing everything they possibly can to stop this huge Russian force, which some people, by the way, are now saying may number 200,000 men, not 100,000 men, as I said, to prevent this huge Russian force rolling west, smashing Ukraine's army in its wake. And I was fascinated to read a commentary in the Daily Mail, Britain's most widely read news website, run by the Daily Mail newspaper, and with strong connections to the British government, in which the Daily Mail says precisely the same thing. And I'm going to quote this in detail because, in my opinion, this is, in fact, final confirmation that my analysis is essentially the correct one. This is what it says. Putin is playing a suspense game, according to Russia expert Dr. Marina Vorotnyuk of the Royal United Services Institute. And the longer he keeps everyone anxiously waiting, the more political capital he gains. A full-scale attack of eastern Ukraine and Crimea seems to be on hold for now, because the build-up of troops and military hardware is achieving its desired effect of scaring the West. Scaring the West. That's the Daily Mail's words, not mine. But just one mistake by Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky could dramatically trigger an advance of thousands of Russian troops back into the territory. The response by the UK and US would be heavy on rhetoric rather than military action, thereby providing Putin with another propaganda victory in time for the Russian parliamentary elections later this year. As this game plays out, London and Washington appear impotent. All words and no intervention, because there is simply no desirable course of action for NATO's leading partners to embark upon to influence Russia's affairs. This lack of options is as obvious to Putin as it is to anyone else. The reality is only he is in a position to call the shots. comedian turned politician Zelensky is equally powerless when it comes to influencing Putin or NATO, the defense alliance he is so desperate to join. Because while US President Joe Biden and UK Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab have been at pains to express their unwavering support for Ukraine's territorial sovereignty and profuse in their condemnation of Russia's escalation of tensions, the US and UK governments are not going to risk a direct confrontation with Moscow. Similarly, in spite of Ukraine's valuable contributions to NATO security operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, it is not going to be granted membership of the alliance anytime soon, certainly not before the issues in the Donbass breakaway regions and the Crimea are solved. So there it is. The US and UK are scared. They're scared of the prospect of a war in eastern Ukraine, which will result in the destruction of Ukraine's army and quite possibly, and quite probably, in fact, as Sergei Lavrov said, the destruction of Ukraine itself. They have no options. They're not prepared to intervene militarily on Ukraine's side. It seems they're even withdrawing the 2 US warships they were going to send into the Black Sea, and the prospect of Ukraine being granted NATO membership is on indefinite hold. Ukraine is in a limbo. It cannot advance. It cannot retreat. If it retreats, it is humiliated and its political crisis deepens, perhaps beyond control. If it advances, it is going to be defeated militarily, and its very survival as a state would be in question. It's US and British and Western allies who have spoken so profusely in support of it, and who were the original parties that led it on its path towards, as the Ukrainians like to say, Euro-Atlantic integration, are now scared of the consequences of their own actions and are not prepared to intervene on its behalf. Economic aid to Ukraine has failed to turn its economy round, and Ukraine, in fact, has been kept ever since the Maidan events of 2014 on a permanent drip of aid coming in small quantities every so often from the IMF, which is just enough to keep the Ukrainian economy ticking at its present low level, but not enough for Ukraine to achieve a proper recovery. I wonder for how much longer this situation can continue for. I would say this. In a few months, it looks now all but inevitable that Nord Stream 2 will be completed. The press conference between Lloyd Austin and Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer all but confirms that the US has given up its attempts to stop Nord Stream 2. At that point, despite all the assurances we have heard, Ukraine's position as a transit state for Russian gas supplies to Europe is essentially ended, or at least, if not ended, time limited. From NATO's point of view, Ukraine was useful for 3 reasons. As territory, advanced far into the former Soviet Union, but territory which cannot be held militarily, as the events of the last few weeks have shown, for its naval base in Crimea at Sevastopol, which is now out of reach, and for its control, for the control it has over the transit of gas supplies from Russia to Europe. As of the end of this year, all these factors will no longer be in play. Crimea is irretrievably lost, together with its naval base. The territory of Ukraine is undefendable, and the gas pipelines will very soon become redundant. So this investment of resources in Ukraine is rapidly reaching that point where it is becoming a dead loss. There is no prospect of things in Ukraine being turned round. And I would have thought that when Putin speaks to Biden and to Merkel and talks about a political solution to the situation in Ukraine, they may finally start paying attention to what he has to say. That solution being in the short term, direct negotiations between the Ukrainian government and the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, but ultimately a more drastic solution for Ukraine. And I go back now to that Daily Mail article because it outlines what it is. Russia's proposed solution is for Ukraine to federalize and for the breakaway regions to be granted permanent autonomy. That, I think, is the direction of travel. It will make NATO and EU membership impossible. It may prove unacceptable in Ukraine itself and cause a further political breakdown there. But I think before very long, it is the solution that the Western powers are going to start to embrace. Thank you very much for joining me for this program. I look forward to you joining me in future programs, both on this channel and on our main channel, the Duran, where I do programs with my colleague and friend, Alex Christoforou. Please also check out Alex's own channel. You will find links under this video. Please also check us out on our various platforms, BitChute, Library, Rumble, and especially Odyssey. And please also, to the extent that you can, support us through PayPal, Patreon, and Subscribestar. And please remember, we accept donations in all forms of currencies, including the new alternative ones. Last but not least, remember our Discord server and check out our shop and find for yourself the wonderful things you will find there. Our amazing magic mugs, our t-shirts, our hats, our hoodies, our sweatshirts. And remember, by buying those things, you will not only become the proud owner of these wonderful products, you also are in a position to help us at the Duran. Thank you very much for joining me for this program, which I hope and expect, by the way, will be the last for some time on this Ukrainian topic, unless there is a sudden flare-up or dramatic new news. And in the meantime, have a wonderful day, and I look forward to you joining me on future videos. Thank you very much, and speak to you soon.